I've been a law enforcement ranger with the Forest Service for 11 years. The first 9 were in Region 5, California, which means I spent most of my career dealing with illegal grows on national forest land, the occasional meth lab in a dispersed campsite, and a steady background hum of DUI contacts on forest roads during holiday weekends. Standard federal land law enforcement. You get comfortable with a rhythm. You develop instincts for what a bad campsite looks like from 300 yards. You learn to read tire tracks the way some people read weather. I transferred to the Chickamauga-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin in the spring of 2024, the Lakewood-Lona Ranger District. My wife is from Oconto Falls, and her mother's health had been declining. And when a position opened up on the East Zone, we decided the timing was right. I'd been told the workload would be lighter, fewer grows, fewer confrontations, more resource protection cases, more public contact, more time in the truck with the windows down. That turned out to be mostly true. What nobody told me, or what I failed to register when they did, was how much of the job on the Nicolet side involves structures, not cabins or shelters, though there are those. Structures in the broader sense, old CCC-era bridges, decommissioned pump houses, historical markers, vault toilets at trailheads, information kiosks, and fire towers. The Chickamauga-Nicolet once had 14 lookout towers across the forest. Most were decommissioned decades ago. A few were demolished. A few were left standing. One, the Mountain Fire Lookout Tower, was restored and open to the public. The rest sit in various states of legal limbo. They're on the national forest, so they're our responsibility. But they're not maintained, not staffed, and in most cases, not even regularly inspected. My supervisor, Diane Kowalski, explained the protocol during my first week. Once a year, usually in late spring after snowmelt and before the summer recreation season, someone from our office drives out to each standing tower and conducts a structural compliance check. You verify the perimeter fencing is intact. You check the base bolts for corrosion. You photograph the exterior from 4 cardinal points. You note any new graffiti, any signs of forced entry, any storm damage. If the cab is accessible and the stairs are rated safe, you go up. You check the windows, the door seal, the hatch. You photograph the interior. You fill out an FS 6300 condition report and file it with the district. It's the kind of work that takes 90 minutes per tower and generates a 4-page form that probably nobody reads until something falls down. Diane assigned me 3 towers for my first spring rotation. 2 of them, Hilbert Tower and McCaslin Brook Tower, were straightforward. Short drives on maintained forest roads, quick inspections, no surprises. The steel was sound. The fencing was intact. The cabs were locked and showed no signs of entry. I was in and out before lunch both days. The third was listed on the rotation sheet as Hagen Creek Tower. I should say up front that I'd never heard of Hagen Creek Tower before I saw it on that sheet. That's not unusual. The Nicolet side of the forest covers over 660,000 acres, and most of the decommissioned infrastructure exists only in administrative databases and on old topo maps. But when I searched the tower's name in our internal system, I got less information than I expected. There was a construction date, 1937, and a decommission date, 1968. An air motor steel tower, 80 feet, with a standard 7x7 cab. The last condition report on file was from 2019, 5 years old. I mentioned this to Diane. She didn't seem concerned. She said the tower was on a spur off Forest Road 2184, north of the Wabicon Lake area. She said the access road had been in rough shape the last time anyone drove it, and that sometimes the rotation skipped a tower if the road was too washed out to justify the mileage. She said 2020 through 2023 had been lean staffing years, COVID, budget freezes, early retirements, and that some of the more remote assets had simply gone uninspected. She told me to bring a full tank of gas, a good spare tire, and my body cam. The body cam comment was routine. Forest Service law enforcement rangers in our region had been wearing body-worn cameras since 2021. Axon Body 3 units, chest-mounted. Standard policy was to activate the camera during any enforcement contact, any structure entry, and any situation where documentation of physical conditions might be relevant to a future report. A tower inspection qualifies. You're entering a government structure, documenting its condition. The footage backs up the written report. It's not dramatic. Most of it is 30 minutes of a chest-mounted camera staring at rusted bolts and cracked window panes while the ranger narrates part numbers into a mic. I drove out to the Hagen Creek Tower on a Tuesday in late May. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-60s. Bugs weren't bad yet. The forest up there is dense second-growth sugar maple, yellow birch, hemlock-thick canopy with a wet, loamy floor. Forest Road 2184 was gravel, well graded for the first 4 miles. Then it narrowed where a spur branched north. The spur was gated. I had the combination from Diane's notes. Beyond the gate, the road degraded quickly. Ruts from old logging traffic had never been graded out. Alders were closing in from both shoulders. In a few spots, the canopy was so dense overhead that the light dropped to something close to dusk, even at 11 in the morning. My truck's mirrors were brushing branches for the last quarter mile. Then the road ended in a small clearing, maybe 40 feet across, and the tower was there. I want to describe this carefully, because it matters. The Hagen Creek Tower looked exactly like what it was. An 80-foot air motor steel tower that had been standing in a northern Wisconsin forest for 87 years. The steel was weathered to a dark reddish brown. Heavy surface corrosion, but structurally intact from what I could see at ground level. The base legs were set in concrete footings, and the footings looked solid. The perimeter had no fencing. The old chain link was gone. Just a few bent posts remaining at the corners. The staircase zigzagged up in standard switchback flights. The cab at the top was a dark square against the sky, windows reflecting white. Nothing about it was remarkable. It looked like 100 other decommissioned towers I'd seen in photographs and agency archives. A tall, angular skeleton in a green clearing, slowly losing its argument with rust and gravity. I activated my body cam, stated the date and time and my purpose, and began the exterior walk-around. The base bolts were corroded but intact. No visible structural deformation. The stair stringers showed surface rust but no perforation. I tested the first flight with my weight solid. I noted 2 missing handrail sections on the third flight. Took photographs. The cab was visible from below. Windows intact on 3 sides, 1 cracked pane on the south face. I could see the underside of the floor through the open stairwell plywood, standard for the era, with some visible water staining. I climbed. 80 feet on a steel tower staircase takes about 3 minutes if you're stopping to photograph each landing. I was alone. The wind was light but audible, that thin, constant sound you get at height in a forest clearing, where the air moves differently than it does under canopy. The stairs creaked in the usual places. I could feel the tower's natural sway, the slight flex that's engineered into every air motor design. It's normal. It's supposed to do that. I've read the engineering specs, but knowing something flexes by design and feeling it flex under your boots are different experiences. At the top landing, I reached the trap door. This is standard air motor cab access. A hinged plywood hatch in the floor of the cab, usually secured from inside with a latch or from outside with a padlock. Diane's notes indicated a padlock, combination provided. I found the padlock. It was a Master 175, same model we use on half the gates in the district. It was corroded almost black, but the combination worked on the third try after I sprayed it with the WD-40 I'd brought. I removed the lock. I pushed the hatch up. The hatch swung open with resistance, not mechanical resistance, but the kind you get from a seal that hasn't been broken in years. A compression of stale air releasing. There was a smell, not rot, not animal. Something closer to old paper and mineral dust. Dry, sealed, undisturbed. I put my head through the hatch. The cab was 7 feet by 7 feet. I could see the entire interior from the hatch opening without entering. 4 walls of windows, 2 panes per side, 8 panes total. The standard air motor configuration. A wooden shelf ran along one wall. Beneath it, a simple wooden cabinet, door ajar. In the center of the room, bolted to a waist-high wooden pedestal, was an Osborne fire finder, the circular brass sighting instrument that every lookout used for triangulating smoke columns. The map disc was still in place. The sighting vanes were still mounted. The whole thing was coated in a fine gray dust, but appeared complete. Against the far wall, pushed into the corner, was a wooden chair, the kind you'd find in a schoolroom in the 1950s. A metal frame stool sat beside the shelf. On the shelf itself, I could see a tin coffee can, a folded cloth that might have been a rag, and what looked like a glass jar with a metal lid. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was unexpected. It looked like a fire lookout cab that had been closed in 1968 and never reopened. I pulled myself through the hatch and stood up inside. This is the part that the bodycam recorded. And this is where the disagreement begins. In my experience and what I remember, clearly, without qualification, I stood in that cab for approximately 12 to 14 minutes. I conducted a standard interior inspection. I photographed the windows, the shelf, the cabinet, the fire finder, the chair, the floor, the ceiling. I narrated the condition of each element into my mic. I noted the cracked south-facing pane. I opened the cabinet. It contained a rusted pair of binoculars and a folded topographic map, both of which I photographed in place and did not remove. I checked the floor for soft spots. I checked the ceiling for leaks. I looked out each window and noted the sight lines, dense canopy on all sides, no visible clearings except the access road below. The view would have been open once, before the surrounding forest grew tall enough to swallow the horizon. I finished the inspection. I climbed back down through the hatch. I closed the hatch. I replaced the padlock. I descended the stairs. I returned to my truck. I drove back down the spur, through the gate, onto the maintained forest road, and back to the district office. I filed the condition report that afternoon. I marked the tower as structurally sound, recommended the handrail sections be noted for eventual repair, and flagged the cracked window pane. Standard paperwork. Then I uploaded my bodycam footage. The Axon system we use stores footage locally on the unit and uploads to a cloud server when the camera is docked at the end of the shift. The upload is automatic. The files are time-stamped, GPS tagged, and tamper-evident. The system logs any interruption, any gap, any edit attempt. It's designed for courtroom-grade chain of custody. This matters. I didn't watch the footage that day. There was no reason to. I filed the report from memory and my still photographs, which is normal procedure. The bodycam footage exists as a backup, a visual record, in case the written report is ever questioned or needed for liability purposes. My partner, Kevin Lautner, watched it first. Kevin is a GS9 LEO who'd been on the Lakewood-Leona district for 3 years before I arrived. Good ranger. Methodical. Not someone who startles easily or speaks carelessly. He was reviewing my footage as part of a routine quality assurance check, something our supervisor had us do monthly, rotating through each other's files to verify that cameras were being activated properly and that timestamps were syncing. It's tedious administrative work that exists because the bodycam policy requires it. Kevin came to my desk on a Thursday afternoon, about 2 days after the inspection. He had his laptop open. He set it in front of me and said, "I need you to watch the Hagen Creek footage." He didn't say why. His expression wasn't alarmed. It was controlled the way a professional looks when they've found something they want confirmed before they characterize it. I sat down. He cued the footage to the moment I opened the trapdoor hatch. On the bodycam recording, I watched myself push the hatch up. I saw the cab interior appear in the wide-angle lens, the windows, the shelf, the firefinder, the chair. The image was slightly fish-eyed, as bodycam footage always is, and the exposure adjusted as the camera moved from the dark stairwell into the brighter cab. I pulled myself through the hatch. The camera swept the room as I stood up and turned. And then I saw what Kevin had seen. The cab was not empty. On the bodycam footage, on the time-stamped GPS-tagged, tamper-evident footage from my chest-mounted Axon Body 3, the interior of the Hagen Creek Tower cab contained items that I did not see when I was standing in it. Not an animal, not a person. Objects. Against the east wall, beneath the windows, there was a row of glass jars. Not one, the way I'd noted, but at least 9 or 10, lined up with visible spacing between them. They appeared to contain something dark, not empty. Each one was capped with a metal lid. On the shelf, beside the coffee tin, there were papers. Not a single folded map. A stack, maybe 2 inches thick, held together with what looked like a rubber band or a strap. I could see the edges clearly in the footage. They were not there when I stood at that shelf and photographed it. The chair was not in the corner where I remembered it. On the footage, the chair was positioned directly in front of the firefinder, as though someone had been sitting at it. And on the seat of the chair, clearly visible for almost 4 seconds as I turned past it, there was a pair of work gloves. Leather, palms up. Fingers curled slightly inward, the way gloves look when someone has just taken them off. None of this was in my memory. None of it appeared in my still photographs, which I had taken with my personal phone during the same inspection. And I had stood in that room for 12 to 14 minutes. Kevin let the footage play. I watched myself conduct the inspection, narrating, photographing, opening the cabinet, moving through the cab as though the jars and the papers and the gloves did not exist. On the audio, I described exactly what I remembered. 1 jar, 1 folded map, the chair in the corner. My body moved through the space in a way that was consistent with my memory and inconsistent with what the camera was recording. At one point, and Kevin had already flagged this, with a timestamp I walked directly past the row of jars. My hip was within 18 inches of them. I did not mention them. I did not photograph them. I did not appear to look at them. Hecken. Kevin paused the footage. He looked at me. "How many jars did you see in that cab?" he asked. "1," I said. "1 glass jar on the shelf, metal lid. I photographed it." He turned the laptop so we could both see the screen. He advanced the footage frame by frame until the row of jars was centered in the image. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. "The camera saw 10, he said. I want to be precise about what happened next, because this is where the story either earns your attention or loses it, and I understand that. I did not panic. Kevin did not panic. We are law enforcement officers who carry firearms and conduct investigations for a living. We do not leap to conclusions. What we do is eliminate possibilities. The first possibility was a camera malfunction. Axon Body 3 cameras do not hallucinate objects. They are optical recording devices. They capture light. If an object is in the frame, it reflected or emitted photons that passed through the lens and struck the sensor. There is no failure mode in any body-worn camera that produces coherent, three-dimensional, correctly lit, spatially consistent objects that do not exist. We confirmed this with Axon's technical documentation that evening. Kevin pulled the spec sheet. I called our regional equipment coordinator in Milwaukee. The answer was unambiguous. The camera records what is in front of it. The second possibility was that the footage had been altered. The Axon evidence system uses a cryptographic audit trail. Every file is hashed at the point of creation. Any modification, any frame insertion, deletion, or edit breaks the hash and is flagged automatically by the server. Kevin and I pulled the audit log together. The file was clean, unmodified from the moment of capture to the moment of upload. No one had touched it. The third possibility was the one that actually made my stomach tighten. That the objects were there. That they were physically present in the cab while I stood in it. And that I did not perceive them, Kevin and I. Sat in the district office for a long time that Thursday evening. The building was empty. Diane had left at 4. The front desk volunteer was gone, and the seasonal crew wasn't due in for another 2 weeks. Just us, the laptop, and the footage paused on a frame that showed 10 glass jars I had walked past without seeing. We went through the recording 3 more times. Each viewing confirmed the same details. The jars were consistent across every frame in which they appeared, same positions, same spacing, same apparent contents. The stack of papers on the shelf was visible from multiple angles as my body turned through the cab. The gloves on the chair seat were in frame for a total of 11 seconds across the full inspection. They cast shadows. The light struck them the way it struck everything else in the room. They were no more and no less real than the fire finder or the cabinet or the cracked window pane that I had documented in my written report. Kevin asked me to describe my inspection again. Not what the footage showed, what I remembered. I told him exactly what I've told you. 1 jar, 1 folded map. The chair in the corner, empty. The binoculars and topo map inside the cabinet. The dust, the smell. The normal, undisturbed stillness of a room that hadn't been opened in years. He asked if I'd felt anything unusual while I was up there. Any lightheadedness, disorientation, visual disturbance, any sense that something was off. No, I'd felt nothing. The inspection had been routine. I had descended the stairs in a normal state of mind, driven 40 minutes back to the office, and written a report without hesitation or uncertainty. My memory of the event was clear, detailed, and internally consistent. It was simply wrong, or the camera was wrong, but we'd already eliminated that. Kevin closed the laptop. He sat back. He said, "We need to go back." I agreed, not because I had a theory, but because we had a discrepancy between 2 forms of documentation. My report and the footage and the professional response to that discrepancy was to return to the site and determine which record accurately described the current condition of the structure. We drove out on Friday morning. Both of us. 2 trucks, because that's standard for any site revisit involving an evidentiary question, separate vehicles, separate documentation, independent observations. Kevin wore his body cam. I wore mine. We agreed in advance that we would each conduct an independent inspection of the cab interior, that we would not communicate our observations until both inspections were complete, and that we would each produce a written description before comparing notes. This was not protocol for a routine tower check. This was the kind of procedure you use when you're building a case file you expect someone to challenge. The drive was the same. Gate, combination, degraded spur road, alder branches against the mirrors, clearing tower. The morning was overcast, low ceiling, temperature around 58 degrees, light rain threatening but not arriving. The tower looked the same. The padlock was where I'd left it, combination still functional. Kevin went up first. We'd agreed to that he would inspect the cab alone while I waited at the base. Then I would go up while he waited. No overlap, no contamination of observation. He climbed. I stood at the base of the tower and listened to the structure creak under his weight. The same slight harmonic I'd felt on my own ascent. I heard the hatch open, a faint sound from 80 feet up, like a book dropping on a carpeted floor. Then nothing for about 15 minutes. Then the hatch closing. Then his boots on the stairs descending. He came down, walked to his truck, and sat in the cab with the door open. He wrote for about 10 minutes. Then he nodded at me. I climbed. The hatch opened the way it had before. The same resistance, the same release of sealed air. Though the smell was fainter this time, maybe because the seal had been broken 3 days earlier and hadn't fully re-established. I pulled myself through and stood up. The cab was the same. One glass jar on the shelf, metal lid, a folded cloth, a tin coffee can, the Osborne firefinder in the center, dust undisturbed, the cabinet with the binoculars and the topo map, the chair in the corner, no row of jars along the east wall, no stack of papers, no gloves. I conducted the inspection again. Slowly, I narrated every object I could see. I opened the cabinet. I looked under the shelf. I checked behind the firefinder pedestal. I got on my knees and looked at the floor along the east wall where the jars had appeared on the footage. The floor was bare plywood. There were no dust rings, no marks, no impressions, nothing to suggest that 9 or 10 glass jars had been sitting there 3 days ago or at any other time. I spent 22 minutes in the cab. I was thorough past the point of reason. When I came down, I walked to my truck and wrote my observations without speaking to Kevin. Then we compared. His description matched mine. 1 jar, 1 map. Chair in the corner. No anomalous objects. No jars along the east wall. No papers, no gloves. And both of our body cams had been running the entire time. We uploaded the footage that evening. Kevin docked his camera first. I watched the upload confirmation, then docked mine. We waited for the system to process both files, then opened them side by side on Kevin's laptop. Kevin's footage showed a cab containing 1 glass jar on the shelf, a tin coffee can, a folded cloth, the Osborne firefinder, the chair in the corner, the cabinet, and nothing else. It matched his written description. It matched his memory, my footage from the same cab, the same morning, less than 30 minutes after Kevin had descended, showed the jars again. 10 glass jars along the east wall, the stack of papers on the shelf, the gloves on the chair, which was now positioned in front of the firefinder, not in the corner where I had seen it and where Kevin had seen it and where Kevin's camera had seen it. The same objects, the same positions. Visible, sharp, casting shadows, reflecting ambient light from the overcast sky through the windows. present in every frame where the camera's angle included them. I was in the footage too, of course, moving through the space, narrating, describing a room that did not contain these objects, stepping past them, turning away from them, documenting their absence while the camera on my chest documented their presence. Kevin didn't speak for a while. He replayed my footage, then his. Mine, then his. The cab in his footage was spare and consistent, the room I remembered, the room we both remembered. The cab in my footage was the same room, with more in it, not transformed, not distorted, just occupied differently. Same camera model, he said. Same firmware version, same upload path, same server. Yes, your camera sees things in that room that mine doesn't. That's what the footage shows. He looked at me. Or that room has things in it when you're in it that it doesn't have when I'm in it. Neither of us was comfortable with either formulation, and I want to be honest about that. We were not approaching this with open minds. We were approaching it the way two law enforcement officers approach any evidentiary contradiction, looking for the explanation that lets us close the file and move on. We wanted a camera defect. We wanted a software artifact. We wanted anything that would let us write this off as a technical anomaly with a manufacturer's reference number and a corrective action. So we tested the cameras. On Monday, Kevin and I swapped Axon units. He took mine. I took his. We drove to the Mountain Fire Lookout Tower, the restored, publicly accessible one, the one the district maintains and opens to visitors. We climbed to the cab. We each recorded a walkthrough of the interior, side by side, simultaneously. We came down. We uploaded. Both recordings showed the same room, identical contents, no discrepancies. My camera, now on Kevin's chest, recorded what Kevin saw. His camera, now on my chest, recorded what I saw. Same objects, same positions, same lighting. We swapped back and did it again. Same result. Both cameras functioning identically. No artifacts, no phantom objects, no discrepancies of any kind. The cameras were fine. The cameras had always been fine. Kevin had the idea to try Hagen Creek with the swap still in effect. On Wednesday, we drove out again. Same procedure, independent inspections, no communication, written observations before comparison. This time, Kevin wore my original camera and I wore his. Kevin went up first. He came down after 15 minutes, wrote his notes. I went up. The room was the same as my second visit. One jar, folded cloth, coffee tin, fire finder, chair in the corner, no jars along the east wall. I completed the inspection and came down. We uploaded. Kevin's footage recorded with my camera. On his body showed a clean, spare cab. One jar, chair in the corner, consistent with his observation and his memory. My footage recorded with Kevin's camera on my body showed the jars, the papers, the gloves, the chair in front of the fire finder. It wasn't the camera. It was me. Or more precisely, it was whatever was in front of me. The recording device didn't matter. The body wearing it did. When I was in the cab contained objects that I could not see and did not perceive, but that any optical device pointed at the space from my approximate position could capture. When Kevin was in the cab, those objects were not present, not invisible, not hidden, but not there. His cameras recorded their absence because they were absent. I want to stop here and say something about what this felt like. Not the intellectual puzzle of it, I'll get to that, but the physical, daily experience of walking around knowing that the air in front of your chest contains accurate information that your eyes do not deliver to your brain. It is not frightening in the way you might expect. It's not like seeing a ghost or hearing a voice. There is no threat. Nothing in that cab was dangerous. The jars were just jars. The gloves were just gloves. The papers were just papers. What was disturbing, what kept me up at night and made me grip the steering wheel too hard on the drive home, was the implication about my own perception, about the difference between what I'm able to experience and what is apparently real. I've spent 11 years trusting my eyes. My job depends on observation. I testify in court about what I saw, where I saw it, and when. The foundation of that testimony is the assumption that I perceive what is there. Not perfectly, I understand parallax, blind spots, attention filtering, all the normal limitations of human vision. But fundamentally, categorically, I've always operated on the premise that if something is physically in front of me and I look at it, I will see it. The Hagen Creek footage told me that premise was wrong, not in general, not as an abstract philosophical point. Wrong about me, specifically, in that specific room. Kevin and I discussed what to do. This is where I need to acknowledge something. The story summaries I was given explicitly identified. I was not alone in this. Kevin was with me from the second day forward. We made every decision together. The weight of this, the confusion, the testing, the documentation, was distributed between two professionals who trusted each other and who had the same training and the same interest in finding a rational answer. We told Diane, not because we were required to. A tower condition report doesn't normally generate a briefing with the district ranger, but because we had 3 sets of bodycam footage containing material discrepancies that were now in the Axon evidence system, time-stamped and permanent. If anyone ever pulled that footage for any reason, the discrepancy would be visible. We preferred to surface the issue ourselves rather than have it surface unexpectedly. Diane watched the footage. All 3 visits. She watched each file in sequence, paused at the moments Kevin and I had flagged, and compared the frames side by side the same way we had. She asked the same questions we'd asked: camera malfunction, software error, tampering, and we walked her through the elimination process. When we finished, she sat quietly for about 30 seconds. Then she said something I didn't expect. How do you feel? Not, what do you think happened? Not, what do you want to do about it? How do you feel? I told her I felt fine, physically fine. No headaches, no vision problems, no confusion. Kevin confirmed the same from his side. He felt normal. His footage was normal. His perception and his cameras agreed with each other completely. The anomaly was specific to my footage, and only at that one location. Diane asked if I'd been to any other structures since my first visit to Hagen Creek. I'd done 2 campground inspections and a trailhead kiosk check. She had me pull that footage. We reviewed it together. Everything was normal. My body cam recorded exactly what I described, exactly what was there. No discrepancies anywhere, only Hagen Creek. Diane made a decision that I respected at the time and still respect now, even though it didn't resolve anything. She said she was going to visit the tower herself. She was not law enforcement. She was the district ranger, an administrative and resource management position, but she had authority to inspect any structure on her district, and she had her own body cam from a prior policy initiative. She said she would go up alone, record the inspection, and we would compare her footage to all existing files. She went on Friday. Kevin and I were not present. She drove out alone, climbed alone, inspected the cab alone, and returned to the office by early afternoon. Her footage showed a clean cab. 1 jar, 1 cloth, 1 coffee tin, 1 fire finder, 1 chair in the corner. No jars along the east wall. No papers, no gloves, consistent with every observation Kevin had made and with every observation I had made, and inconsistent with every recording my body cam had made while I was inside. 3 people, 3 visits. 3 independent visual assessments, all agreeing. 3 bodycam recordings, 2 agreeing, 1 showing a different room. And the one that was different was always mine. Diane filed the original condition report I'd written, the one based on my visual observation, not the footage as the official record. She noted the body cam discrepancy in a supplemental memo that she placed in the tower's administrative file, not the public record. She classified it as an unresolved equipment anomaly pending further review. I understood why she did that. The written report and 3 human observers agreed. 1 camera consistently, repeatedly, only in my presence and only at that location, disagreed. If you're an administrator balancing documentation standards against operational reality, you go with the consensus. You flag the outlier. You move on. But she also did something else. She told Kevin and me that the tower was now off our inspection rotation for the remainder of the fiscal year. She said she would handle any future visits personally or assign them to a seasonal when the summer crew arrived. She framed it as workload balancing. It wasn't. Kevin and I didn't go back. That was Diane's decision, and we followed it. But we didn't stop thinking about it, and we didn't stop talking about it quietly between ourselves, in the kind of conversations that happen in truck cabs on long drives to campground patrols. The questions we kept coming back to were the same ones you're probably asking. What were the objects? If they were physically present, what were they? Jars containing something dark, a stack of papers, work gloves. These are not exotic items. They are exactly the kind of things you'd expect to find in a working fire lookout, preserves or specimens in jars, logbooks or observation records. Gloves worn during manual labor at height. The inventory was consistent with a cab that was in active use, not abandoned in 1968 and sealed for 56 years. In use, occupied, maintained. Who put them there? The padlock was ours. The combination hadn't changed in years, according to Diane. But it wasn't published anywhere. Forest Service staff had access. Theoretically, anyone who'd ever been given the combination had access. But the dust in the cab on the floor, on the fire finder, on the shelf, was consistent with years of disuse. In my visual observation, nothing had been disturbed. In Kevin's and Diane's visual observations, same thing. Only in the footage, only on my camera, was the room furnished differently. Why only me? This was the question that Kevin and I circled most often and never landed on. I had no prior connection to the tower, no history on the Nicolet, no personal or family ties to the area. I'd never met anyone associated with the tower's operational years. There was nothing in my background, my medical history, or my professional record that should differentiate my perceptual experience from Kevin's or Diane's. And yet, the evidence was consistent. 4 visits, the same result. My eyes saw one thing. The camera on my chest, regardless of which camera it was, saw another. And every other person's eyes and cameras agreed with each other. In early June, Diane assigned a seasonal ranger named Ariel Mendez to conduct the next quarterly check on Hagen Creek Tower. Ariel was 24, a graduate student in forestry at UW-Stevens Point, working her second summer season with us. She had no involvement in any of our previous visits and no knowledge of the footage discrepancy. Diane briefed her on the tower location and the standard inspection protocol, and sent her out on a Wednesday morning with a body cam and a condition report form. Ariel came back that afternoon with a clean report and clean footage. 1 jar, 1 cloth, 1 coffee tin, fire finder, chair in the corner. No anomalies. Diane asked me to come to her office that evening. She had Ariel's footage queued on her monitor. I want you to watch this with me, she said. I want to know if you see what Ariel's camera saw. I watched the footage. It showed exactly what Ariel described. A spare, dusty, undisturbed cab. One jar. The room I remembered. The room everyone remembered. Diane nodded. She didn't say anything else about it that evening. But the next morning, she asked me a question that reframed everything. Would you be willing to go back up, she said, with Ariel's camera, while Ariel is in the cab with you? I said yes. Kevin volunteered to be the ground observer stationed at the base of the tower with a clear sight line to the cab windows, equipped with his own camera and a pair of binoculars. We went out on a Saturday. The four of us. Diane drove her own vehicle and parked at the clearing but did not climb. She said her role was to maintain chain of custody on the footage and witness the upload afterward. Ariel and I climbed together. She went through the hatch first. I followed. I stood in the cab with Ariel Mendez at 10:17 in the morning on a clear June day, and I saw exactly what I had always seen. One jar, one cloth, coffee tin, fire finder, chair in the corner. The room was small, 7 by 7. 2 people made it feel close, but it was the same room. Ariel was narrating her own observations into her mic. I was narrating mine. We described the same space. We agreed on every object, every position, every detail. We came down. Kevin reported nothing unusual from his ground-level observation. He'd watched through binoculars and seen 2 people moving in a normally furnished cab. No anomalous objects visible through the windows. We drove back. We uploaded. Ariel's footage from her camera on her body, standing beside me, showed the clean room. One jar, chair in the corner, consistent with her eyes, her words, and her written report. My footage from the camera I was wearing showed the jars. 10 jars along the east wall, papers on the shelf, gloves on the chair positioned at the fire finder, and Ariel, standing in the middle of the room, looking directly at the east wall where the jars were, describing an empty floor. I could see her in my footage. I could see her face. She was calm, professional, observant. She was looking at the jars and not seeing them, or the jars were not there for her, and were there for my camera. Or the jars existed in a way that cameras anchored to my body could register, and human eyes, including mine, could not. Kevin watched the footage with me that evening. Ariel was not present. Diane made the decision not to involve her unless a clear evidentiary reason emerged. I understood that too. You don't unsettle a seasonal employee with something you can't explain, especially when her own footage and experience were entirely normal. But Kevin pointed out something I had missed. He pulled up the frame where Ariel was facing the east wall. He zoomed in not on the jars, but on Ariel's hand. She was holding her phone. She'd been taking reference photos throughout the inspection, same as I always did. And in the frame, her phone's screen was visible. Small, angled, partially obscured by her fingers, but visible. On her phone screen, captured by my bodycam, the image she was composing showed the east wall. And in that image, on her phone, the jars were there. Her own phone pointed at the wall she was looking at and describing as empty was capturing the same objects my bodycam was capturing. But she was looking at the phone screen while framing the shot, and she didn't see them. Kevin and I stared at that frame for a long time. "It's not your camera," he said. "No. It's not any camera. Every camera sees them. When I'm in the room. When you're in the room." He paused. "And no person sees them. Ever. Including you." We sat with that for a week. I don't mean we put the question aside and went about our work. I mean we physically sat with it in Kevin's truck during a long patrol loop up to Wabikun Lake, in the break room at the district office, on the tailgate of my truck in the parking lot after shift. We talked it through the way you work a case that has too many facts and no theory. Going back to the evidence, restating what we knew, identifying what we didn't know. Trying to find the seam where something we'd assumed without testing might be wrong. What we knew was this. Every camera that recorded the interior of the Hagen Creek Tower cab while I was physically present in the cab captured objects that no human observer, including me, perceived. This occurred across 4 separate visits. It occurred regardless of which camera I wore. It occurred regardless of whether I was alone or accompanied. It occurred on Ariel's phone camera while Ariel was holding the phone and looking at its screen. The objects were visually consistent across all recordings, same items, same approximate positions, same physical behavior with respect to light and shadow. The Axon audit logs confirmed that no footage had been modified. The cameras had been tested at other locations and performed normally. Other observers' cameras performed normally at Hagen Creek when I was not present. What we didn't know was everything else. Kevin had a friend from his undergraduate years, not a specialist, not someone we recruited for expertise. Just a guy he'd stayed in touch with who worked in broadcast engineering for a television station in Green Bay. Kevin called him one evening from his apartment, not on a work phone, not in an official capacity. He described the situation in general terms. A body camera consistently capturing objects. In a room that the wearer and other observers couldn't see. He didn't name the location. He didn't mention the Forest Service. The friend listened. He asked a few technical questions about the camera's sensor type, frame rate, and color space. Then he said something that Kevin repeated to me the next morning. He said that a camera sensor and a human eye respond to fundamentally different ranges of the electromagnetic spectrum. The Axon Body 3 uses a CMOS sensor that is sensitive to wavelengths from roughly 350 nanometers to about 1,100 nanometers, extending into the near ultraviolet and the near infrared, well beyond the approximately 380 to 700 nanometer window that human vision covers. Cameras include filters to block the extremes and approximate human vision, but the filters aren't perfect. In certain lighting conditions, particularly in enclosed spaces, with natural light entering through glass at specific angles. A camera can register reflections, surfaces, and objects that are being illuminated primarily by wavelengths outside the visible range. Kevin asked him whether that could explain a camera consistently seeing objects that were physically present but invisible to the naked eye. The friend said no. He said what he described could produce subtle color shifts, faint reflections, maybe a slight haze or glow on surfaces, not solid, opaque, shadow-casting objects with visible texture, not jars with contents, not leather gloves with individual fingers. He said whatever the camera was recording, it was recording visible spectrum light, regular light, the kind human eyes are designed to detect. So either the objects are there and the people can't see them, Kevin summarized, or the objects aren't there and the camera is creating them from scratch. Cameras don't create objects from scratch, the friend said. Kevin told me he sounded genuinely uncomfortable. That's not how photons work. We didn't call him again. What Kevin and I did instead, over the following 2 weeks, was something I'm not sure I can fully defend professionally, but which I'll describe honestly because I'm already past the point where leaving anything out would be more misleading than including it. We went back to Hagen Creek twice more. Diane hadn't explicitly prohibited us from visiting the tower. She'd removed it from our inspection rotation, but she hadn't issued a closure order. The distinction matters. An inspection rotation is a work assignment, visiting a location on the national forest on our own time, even a location with a pending administrative note, is not a policy violation unless the structure has been formally closed to entry. Hagen Creek hadn't been. I understand how that sounds. I also understand that if our positions were reversed and someone told me they'd found a technical loophole to justify repeated visits to a site their supervisor had quietly pulled them from, I would be skeptical of their judgment. I was skeptical of my own. But Kevin and I had arrived at a point where the question was no longer whether the phenomenon was real. The evidence had settled that, but what, specifically, the camera was recording. What were the objects? Could we learn anything about them from the footage itself, if we designed the recordings more carefully? On the first of those 2 visits, in mid-June, we brought additional equipment. Not specialized instruments, we weren't scientists, and we weren't pretending to be. We brought a second camera, Kevin's personal GoPro, which he used for kayaking. We mounted it on a small tripod and placed it on the floor of the cab, pointed at the east wall before I entered the room. Kevin set it up, started it recording, descended the stairs, and waited at the base while I climbed up. The GoPro was not attached to me. It was stationary. It was already in the room before I arrived. I entered the cab through the hatch and conducted a brief inspection, 5 minutes, enough to observe the room and narrate my perception. 1 jar, coffee tin, chair in the corner, the same room. I climbed back down. Kevin went up, retrieved the GoPro, and brought it down. We reviewed the GoPro footage that evening at Kevin's apartment. For the first 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the interval between Kevin starting the camera and leaving the cab, the GoPro showed an empty floor along the east wall. No jars. The room as Kevin and I and Diane and Ariel had all seen it. At 4 minutes and 38 seconds, as I pulled myself through the trapdoor hatch, the jars appeared. Not one by one, not materializing. They were simply present in one frame and absent in the frame before it. The GoPro recorded at 30 frames per second. In frame 8539, the floor was bare. In frame 8540, 10 glass jars sat against the east wall, evenly spaced, each capped with a metal lid, each containing something dark. The transition was instantaneous, 1/30th of a second. No fade, no shimmer, no visual artifact. Just an empty floor, and then a floor with jars on it. I reviewed my own bodycam footage from the same visit. The jars were there from the moment the camera cleared the hatch. Visible, solid, consistent. On my footage, they appeared to have always been there. On the GoPro, which had been watching the same wall from a fixed position for 4 minutes before I entered, they arrived with me. Kevin watched the GoPro transition 6 times. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "It's not the camera. It's not the room. It's not you. It's some kind of conditional presence. They exist when you're there. They stop existing when you're not." I told him that was not a sentence I knew how to put in a report. "No," he said. "It's not." The second unofficial visit was in late June. This time I went alone. Kevin argued against it. He said we'd established the pattern clearly enough and that additional exposure to a phenomenon we couldn't explain was unnecessary risk, even if the risk was purely professional rather than physical. He was right. I went anyway. I want to explain why, because it's the part of this that I've struggled with most. On every previous visit I had walked through that cab surrounded by objects I could not see. I had stepped past them, turned away from them, stood inches from them. They occupied space that my body moved through, and my mind edited them out, or my eyes never registered them. Or whatever was happening operated at a level of perception that I had no access to and no framework for understanding. The experience of standing in a room that you have been shown on 5 separate recordings contains more than you can perceive. It does something to you, not to your sanity, to your confidence, to the basic trust you place in your own senses every time you open your eyes. I went back because I wanted to try to see them. Not with instruments, not with cameras. I wanted to stand in the room and look at the east wall and force my eyes to show me what was there. I understood that this was not rational. I understood that 5 prior visits and 5 consistent failures suggested that whatever mechanism prevented my perception was not something I could override through effort or attention. But I am a person who has spent his professional life looking at things carefully and reporting what I find. And I could not accept that a row of glass jars could exist 18 inches from my body and be permanently invisible to me. I climbed the tower at 7:40 in the morning. Clear sky, early light, the cab windows catching the sunrise and throwing warm parallelograms across the plywood floor. I wore my bodycam activated, recording, and I carried nothing else. I opened the hatch. I stood up in the cab. 1 jar, coffee tin, folded cloth, fire finder, chair in the corner. I turned to the east wall. I stared at the floor beneath the windows. I stared until my eyes watered and the grain of the plywood swam. I let my focus go soft. I let it sharpen. I looked at the wall above. I looked at the window glass. I looked at the light coming through the glass and tried to see if it was falling on anything between the window and the floor. It wasn't. The floor was empty. The light fell on bare wood. I crouched down. I extended my hand toward the floor along the east wall, palm down, and moved it slowly through the space where the cameras had shown the jars to be. My hand passed through empty air. I felt nothing. No resistance, no temperature change, no vibration. I touched the floor. Dry plywood, a thin layer of dust. I ran my fingers along the wall at the baseboard. Nothing. I stood up. I was breathing harder than the exertion warranted. I pressed my palm flat against the east-facing window and looked out at the canopy, the clearing below, the roof of my truck. Everything out there was consistent. Everything in the room was consistent. The room was the room I'd always seen. There was nothing else in it. I downloaded the footage that night at home. My wife was already asleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and watched myself enter the cab, turn to the east wall, stare at it, crouch, extend my hand. And my hand passed through the jars. On the footage, my open palm descended into the row of jars and moved through them the way it would move through air. The jars did not shift. They did not break. My hand did not displace them. They occupied the same space as my hand, simultaneously, without interaction. On the screen, I was touching jar number 4. My fingers were inside the glass. My palm was resting on a surface that was both a jar lid and not there. And my face, visible in the window's reflection, showed the focused, slightly desperate expression of a man reaching for something he cannot find. I closed the laptop. I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The next morning, I told Kevin what I'd found. He was quiet. Then he asked me whether I was sleeping all right, and I told him the truth. I was sleeping fine. I felt fine. I had no symptoms of anything. The phenomenon was confined to one room in one tower and to the recordings made in my presence. My daily life, my other work, my health, my marriage. Everything was normal. The only thing that wasn't normal was that I had footage of my own hand passing through solid objects that I couldn't see, and that the footage was genuine, and that I had no way to explain it. Kevin said, "Then we write it up." And we did. Not as a formal investigation report, we had no case number, no incident to tie it to, no policy framework that accommodated what we documented. We wrote it as a joint memorandum to Diane, summarizing every visit, every test, every result, and every recording. We included timestamps, file reference numbers for every piece of Axon footage, the GoPro file on a thumb drive, and a written chronology with both our signatures. We hand-delivered it to Diane on a Monday in early July. Diane read it in her office while we waited. It took her about 25 minutes. When she finished, she set it down and looked at us the way you look at two employees you trust who have just handed you something that doesn't fit in any drawer you have. She asked 3 questions. First, had either of us shared the footage or the memorandum with anyone outside the district? No. Kevin's call to his friend in Green Bay had been general no names, no location, no agency affiliation. Second, did we believe the footage was authentic? Yes, unambiguously. The Axon audit trail was intact across every file. The GoPro footage corroborated the Axon footage. The pattern was consistent across 6 separate recordings spanning 5 weeks. Third, what did we want her to do with it? That question sat in the room for a while. Kevin looked at me. I looked at the memorandum on Diane's desk. What I wanted was for someone with more authority and more expertise to take the evidence and do something productive with it. But I'd been in government service long enough to know what would happen if we pushed the memorandum up the chain. It would go to the forest supervisor's office. Someone there would read it, not understand it, and either bury it in an administrative file or forward it to the regional office, where someone else would not understand it and request a technical review, which would be assigned to someone who would watch the footage, confirm that the cameras were functioning correctly, and produce a report stating that the recordings contained visual data inconsistent with observer testimony, etiology unknown. No further action recommended. The evidence would be noted. It would not be investigated. It would become a line item in an equipment file somewhere. And the Hagen Creek Tower would continue standing in its clearing. 80 feet of rust and concrete and plywood, holding a room that apparently contained more than anyone could see. I told Diane that I wanted 2 things. I wanted the memorandum and the footage preserved in the tower's permanent file, not the public file, but the administrative one, the complete record. And I wanted it noted that Kevin and I had documented the discrepancy thoroughly, tested it systematically, and reported it through the appropriate channel. Diane said she would do both. Then she said something that I've thought about every day since. She said, "I'm not going to tell you not to go back, but I want you to think about what additional information another visit would give you that you don't already have." She was right. We had 6 recordings. We had a stationary camera showing the objects appearing at the moment of my entry. We had footage of my hand passing through them. We had 4 corroborating observers whose presence and absence changed nothing about the phenomenon, and everything about our ability to confirm it wasn't a hallucination or a technical failure. We had tested every variable we could think of. What we didn't have, what no number of additional visits would provide, was an explanation. We had documented the what beyond any reasonable challenge. The why was somewhere else entirely, in a domain that 2 law enforcement rangers with bodycams and a GoPro were not equipped to enter. I haven't been back to the Hagen Creek Tower. That's not entirely by choice. In August, Diane retired. Her replacement, a transfer from the Medford Park Falls district, inherited the administrative files but received no special briefing about the tower. Diane and I discussed this before she left, and she felt that the memorandum and footage spoke for themselves, and that any verbal emphasis from her would color the new supervisor's reading. I understood her reasoning. The evidence should stand on its own terms. Kevin transferred to a BLM position in Nevada at the end of the season. He and I still talk, though less frequently than we did. When we do talk, we don't discuss Hagen Creek unless one of us raises it deliberately. There's nothing new to say. Ariel completed her seasonal appointment and returned to Stevens Point. She never learned about the footage discrepancy. Her experience at Hagen Creek was exactly what it should have been. A routine tower inspection that generated a clean report and clean footage, conducted by a competent seasonal who perceived exactly what was there, or exactly what was there for her. What I carry and what Kevin carries, and what Diane carries in whatever form retirement allows, is not a haunting. It's not trauma. It's not the unresolved dread of a horror story where the protagonist can't escape the thing in the woods. The thing in the cab wasn't threatening. It wasn't even, in any obvious sense, aware. Jars, papers, gloves, the residue of a daily routine, the furnishings of a working life. Whoever had occupied that cab during its operational years had kept specimens, or preserves in jars along the east wall, had maintained a stack of records on the shelf, had sat at the fire finder with leather gloves and removed them to work the sighting vanes with bare fingers. That's all the object suggested. A person doing a job. The same job I do, in a sense, watching the forest, documenting what you see. The difference is that what they left behind exists in a way that our vocabulary doesn't cover. Present, but not visible. Capturable by any sensor, but perceivable by no eye. Tied to my presence in a way that neither I nor anyone else can account for. Not symbolic, not metaphorical. Physical objects, reflecting photons, casting shadows, occupying coordinates in three-dimensional space that I can walk through as though they are not there. Kevin once asked me, in one of our last conversations before his transfer, whether I thought the objects were really there, or whether something about my presence caused the cameras to record something that had no physical existence. I told him I'd considered both possibilities for weeks and that I couldn't distinguish between them. If the objects are really there and I can't see them, then my perceptual system is editing out real elements of the physical world at that specific location, and I have no way to know what else I might not be seeing in any other room I enter for the rest of my life. If the objects aren't really there, and my proximity causes recording devices to produce coherent images of things that don't exist, then the cameras aren't reliable instruments in my presence, which means every piece of bodycam footage I've ever recorded is potentially suspect. And every piece I record in the future carries an asterisk that I can never remove. Either my eyes are unreliable, or my cameras are. Both are tools I need to do my job. Both have been tested and found to function correctly. And both cannot be right about what is inside a 7x7 plywood room at the top of an 80-foot steel tower on a forgotten spur road in northern Wisconsin. If you've listened to this far, I want to ask you something. Not rhetorically. How do you decide which one to trust? I still don't know. Kevin still doesn't know. We have the footage. It's in the system, time-stamped, hashed, tamper-evident, legally admissible. It shows what it shows, and we have our eyes, which have served us for a combined 60-odd years of being alive and 11 and 14 years, respectively, of professional observation. One of them is telling the truth about that room. We don't know which. And I have to put the camera on my chest again tomorrow morning. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. We release a new investigation every week. I'm aware that what I've described sounds impossible. I understand that. It sounds impossible to me too. And I have the footage. And Kevin has the footage. And Diane has the memorandum in a file somewhere in Oconto County. And the jars are either sitting along the east wall of that cab right now in the dark, or they are not. And I will never know, because every tool I have for answering that question gives me a different answer depending on whether I look through it or look with my own eyes. The tower is still standing. The forest road is still open. The padlock combination hasn't been changed. I don't go back. But some mornings, when I'm uploading a shift's worth of routine footage, campground contacts, trailhead checks, the ordinary work of an ordinary day, I watch the files process, and I think about what the camera is seeing right now. Clipped to my chest in a quiet office, pointed at a desk and a coffee mug and a keyboard. I think about whether everything in the frame is everything that's there. And then I think about Ariel Mendez, standing in front of the east wall, holding up her phone, framing a photograph of an empty floor. And on the screen of her phone, in the image she was composing and could not see, 10 glass jars in a row, catching the light through the windows of a room that someone used to work in. A long time ago, doing the same job she was doing, looking at a piece of the world and writing down what was there. I don't know whose record was more complete, hers or the room's. The footage is in the system. Nobody has requested it. Nobody has reviewed it since Diane left. Kevin is in Nevada. Ariel is in Stevens Point. Diane is in retirement somewhere near Green Bay. And I am here, doing my job, trusting my eyes because I have to, wearing a camera because I'm required to, and carrying the knowledge that in at least one place on this forest, those two acts of faith are in direct, documented, irreconcilable conflict. That's my report.